This is a short lesson on relative clauses in English and in Latin. A relative clause is an adjectival clause, meaning that it describes a noun, like an adjective. So I have some English sentences over here on the left-hand side. The king who reigned long was good. The relative clause is who reigned long, and it is introduced by the relative pronoun who. I like to put parentheses or bracket the relative clause. The king who reigned long was good. When you get to this, you need to identify first the relative pronoun, which in English is who, for sexed things, so people, masculine, feminine. For unsexed, inanimate things, English uses the neuter which, so who or which. So the second sentence, the queen whom I saw reigned long. Whom is a sex thing, so queen. Kingdom is an inanimate, unsexed thing, so we say which. Notice that in English, if we have a plural noun, soldiers, to whom, we could not tell just by the English to whom, whether it's the antecedent is singular or plural. So you have the relative pronoun who, and it has its antecedent. Antecedent means the noun that antecedo comes before. And the relative pronoun must agree with its antecedent in both gender and number, but not necessarily in case. In case, the case comes from how the relative pronoun acts inside its own clause. You have to treat its own clause like its own sentence. So really we have two sentences here. The king was good and the king reigned long. We've combined them into one sentence, linking them with this relative pronoun. The king who reigned long was good. So if king is singular and masculine, in English a sex thing, an animate thing. Who is the subject in English, who reigned long. So if we turn this into Latin, we have rex, and then I've left a blank for the relative pronoun. Diu regebat, and this is the relative clause in Latin. So the way to go about doing this is first identify the antecedent of the relative pronoun being rex. And rex is nominative, and is singular, and is masculine. Therefore, if this is nominative and singular and masculine, the relative pronoun must be singular and must be masculine. It does not have to be nominative. It can be nominative, but it doesn't have to. So make sure you bracket or put parentheses around the relative clause. So the relative clause must be singular, the relative pronoun must be singular and masculine to agree with the antecedent rex. Inside this clause, which I've just bracketed, inside this relative clause, how does the pronoun who act? It's the subject of the verb regebat. So if it's the subject of this verb, we want this to be the nominative. So in this case, these are the same case. And we want qui for the nominative singular masculine relative pronoun. Rex qui diu regebat erat bonus. So let's look at the second sentence. The queen whom I saw reigned long. So we have the regina blank vidi diu regebat. So once again, bracket your relative clause, blank vidi, identify where the relative pronoun will be, and the antecedent of the relative pronoun is regina. If regina is nominative, because she's the subject of the verb regebat, and she's singular and she's feminine, then the relative pronoun must be singular and must be feminine as well to agree with her. But she does not have to be nominative. In fact, she's not. Check out the English sentence. The queen whom I saw reigned long. Now, bracket this relative clause in English, the antecedent being the queen, the regina. Whom? Well, whom is not the subject of the verb saw inside this clause, inside the brackets. I is the subject of the verb saw. Well, whom did I see? I saw the queen. I saw the regina. That would be the accusative reginam. So this is standing in for reginam. I saw the queen. whom. Whom is accusative, the direct object of vidi. So we want quam vidi. Regina quam vidi diu regebat. The Regina is the subject, the nominative subject of this verb regebat. She's the subject of the main verb here. But inside this subordinate clause, this relative clause, she's the direct object of this verb, and I am the subject of it. First person singular, perfect, vidi. The third sentence, the kingdom in which we live is great. So we have the kingdom in which we live, with the relative clause being in which we live. In Latin, we have regnum blank habitamus est magnum. Remember that regnum is neuter. So if this is nominative, being the subject of est, and its predicate magnum, and it's singular and it's neuter, that means that the relative pronoun must likewise be singular and must also be neuter to agree with it. Does not have to be nominative though. Does not have to be nominative like regnum is. In which we live, in which we live. Well, this is going to be the ablative of location, because where do we live? We are living in this kingdom. This would be an ablative of location. So we want ablative location within, in, and then the ablative singular neuter of qui quae quod is quo. Regnum in quo habitamus est magnum. The kingdom in which we live, in which we are living, is great, is big. And then last, here's an example in which we have a plural antecedent, because remember in English, if you just by looking at the relative pronoun, you cannot tell the number, whether it's singular or plural, because they are the same. To whom can be referring to a singular or a plural person. So the soldiers to whom he gave the swords are tall. We have two sentences here. The soldiers are tall, and the soldiers to whom he gave the swords. All bracket, the relative clause, to whom he gave the swords. And in Latin, that's going to be milites blank gladios dedit sunt alti, sunt alti. The milites sunt alti, the soldiers are tall. So the relative pronoun is to whom. Antecedent is soldiers, so here's the relative pronoun. Antecedent being the milites, the soldiers. If the soldiers are nominative, they're the subject of the linking verb sunt, and alti is the predicate agreeing with them, and they are plural and they are masculine, that means that the relative pronoun here must likewise be plural and must also be masculine. It does not have to be nominative. So let's check out what it's going to be. This is nominative subject of sunt. So blank gladios dedit. He, third person singular, gave swords blank to whom? Well, that sounds like dative, indirect object. He gave an accusative direct object, gladios, to a dative indirect object. So we want the dative plural masculine of qui quae quod is quibus. Quibus. Milites quibus gladios dedit sunt alti. So those are just a couple examples of relative clauses in English and in Latin.